Have you heard of the phrase linear fighters, quadratic wizards? This is an old school design philosophy where fighters were supposed to start out strong and continue to grow in power, but not in a way that they blow out the power curve of the game, as opposed to wizards, who were supposed to start out underpowered, where the wizard is carried by the fighter in the early levels until they come into their own power. They blow out the power curve and they can take down a lot of the big threats with game-breaking spells. Now, Pathfinder 2e does not have as many game-breaking spells as older editions did, if any, really, but it still hangs on to a vestige of linear fighters, quadratic wizards. And by doing so, it undercuts a lot of its otherwise very clever design. Hey everyone, Utkarsh from Spirit Bell Games here. If you have not seen the video by Titanium Dragon called Issues with Low-Level Play in Pathfinder 2e, I suggest giving it a watch. It's an enlightening explanation of what is different in the math of the early levels versus the math that the rest of the levels have. Essentially, what the early levels do is they give enemies low HP, especially enemies that are lower level than you, so level 0 and level -1, and it makes higher level enemies, especially like PL plus 2, PL plus 3, and PL plus 4 creatures, very strong, hit hard, and potentially knock you out in one critical hit, potentially even killing you in one critical hit if you were already under your max HP. At this level, at level 1 itself, a lot of enemies, especially minions, can be just killed one shot by fighters and other melee martials, whereas range attacks and cantrip damage is unlikely to take them out in just one hit, unless it's a critical hit. At the same time, minions do trivial amounts of damage to you, and so they're more of an annoyance than an existential threat. And so by going through a number of level 1 combats, players rationally pick up a few guidelines on how they think they should be approaching this game. 1, they should always have a melee martial, if not more than one, because they are the central pillars of combat. 2, that ranged attacks without any bonus modifiers will not take down even minions in just one shot, and neither will cantrips and AoE damage, including coming from spell slots. They also learn that the incapacitate trait is basically pointless because enemies on whom incapacitation would work die easily and are not much of a threat, and enemies on whom incapacitation does not work, like bosses, are the biggest threats. So all of this can be distilled down to a few lessons. Melee martials rock, casters suck unless they are directly supporting the melee martials, and you should design your entire build to account for boss fights, not for fights against mobs. If you watch the Titanium Dragon video, or one of many of Pathfinder's videos, they show that as the game goes on to mid and high levels, these assumptions don't hold true. Hordes of creatures that are lower level than you can become existential threats. Enemies that are higher level than you and bosses, they are still deadly, but they can't easily knock you out with just one good hit. And so at higher levels, incapacitation is useful. Area damage becomes a cornerstone of these very deadly fights against hordes. And casters become more core to the party. And so in this way, Pathfinder 2e uses creature side math to enforce its linear fighters, quadratic wizard philosophy. Because when it comes to just pure damage or pure power, which is damage plus all the other things that classes get, then I don't think wizards are that far behind other classes, including melee martials, even in early game. It's just that the way that they interface with the enemies, it's with area damage, it's with electric arc and weapon attacks without any bonus modifiers, which leads to higher time to kill. And because the enemies themselves can easily go down with one hit of a melee martial, it doesn't make the casters feel like they're necessary, whereas the melee martials do feel like they are necessary. Now, Titanium Dragon posits that this is a mistake that the designers made in the game, and I do not see it as a mistake. I see it as intended design to convey a certain experience, which is, linear fighter, quadratic wizard, but also at the early levels, the game can be used to tell a horror story because the bosses are existential threats. Or it can be used to tell a low fantasy gritty story where the chances of death are higher, especially against major villains. But because of this discrepancy between low level play and mid to high level play, casters feel bad to play at early levels. This is not unique to Pathfinder 2e. It is a holdover from a lot of legacy design that followed the linear fighter quadratic wizard formula, but I don't think it is a part of the fantasy of the TTRPG playing audience anymore. What is interesting to me is that because this linear fighter quadratic wizard formula is being enforced on the creature side, the GM can actually play with creature numbers to make this not feel like it's set in stone. For example, instead of having minions that range from 6 HP to 10 HP, how about just having level -1 minions, creatures, with just 1 HP? Then suddenly, the electric arc plus a bowshot combo from a mage can take out 3 creatures, whereas a fighter may hit twice, but miss with that third -10 multiple attack penalty strike. Another way to go is to give your bosses, your PL+2 or PL+3 creatures, specific elemental damage weaknesses that are difficult for martials to access at early levels, especially melee martials, but are easier for a caster to channel. So you can try a few different techniques to mitigate this imbalance that appears at the start of the game, or you can lean into it by running a horror game or a gritty game at those early levels, or you can skip right past it and jump to level 5 or 7, which I would only recommend if your players have already played through the early levels before, because if they're unfamiliar with Pathfinder 2e, then starting out at level 5 or 7 can be challenging in its own way. At the end of the day, I don't think that the early level design is necessarily a mistake. I think it's nice that we can run horror games and gritty games at those levels, but it's so sad to me that so much of Pathfinder 2e's elegance and balance in design gets squandered just to enable these specific outdated experiences at those early levels. What I have started to do is to get my players through those early levels very quickly, get them to level 5 as soon as possible, and then slow down to a natural pace of leveling. Now, if you have seen my previous videos, you know that I personally like to have all of these classes customizable in many different ways. So I can decide whether I want to pick a jack of all trades, or I want to pick a specialist. If I want to play a caster, what kind of caster? I have built and played early level casters now that are good at doing what they do and know their role. And it's not just a support role, it can be early level damage as well. They just have to come with martial weapon proficiency. But for new players, I don't expect them to understand the breadth of the game's options well enough to know what kind of experiences they'll have. And so to naturally fall into this trap of playing a wizard that only casts cantrips and then feels bad when they realize that their cantrips can't one-shot minions and may be shrugged off by bosses. Now, I have some ideas of one-shot for level 1 that can convey what are the good parts of playing a caster to first-time players. You know, throw swarms at them so that they can use their area abilities and area effect cantrips. You have enemies that are weak to certain energy damage, but as I've mentioned in some previous videos, I would rather Paizo just did this themselves. I think there should be official material that showcases the different strengths that casters and martials bring to the table, even at level 1. You know, it occurs to me that I haven't actually purchased or looked through the new beginner box. What is it? Secrets of the Unlit Star? So maybe I should take a look at that and figure out if there has been any change in enemy design and approaches to make casters shine. If you know the answer, let me know down in the comments below. But for now, this is me signing off, wishing you all engaging games.